people of the state of stone. And I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the space that we're in. You know, there's few people here, but the power that's within this room is great. And what's exciting for me when I find myself in these spaces, the people who are supposed to be here are here. The people who care about these issues are here. And together we are planting seeds for something so much greater. I just got back from South by Southwest last night, and we brought together Indigenous peoples in a prayer for what we wanted to see for emerging industries, emerging representation within all of these spaces that we occupy. And so this is a seed that we're planting. This is a prayer that we're planting together. And I just want to thank Corjosa, the entire team for being here and believing in this. Everyone who's joining us virtually, we see you. We're so thankful to you all. We appreciate you deeply. And those who will see the recording of this, and we will spread this knowledge throughout the channels of the internet and through the platforms of social media. But this is how it begins, right? This is how it begins. So I'm really excited that we're able to gather in community and hold space for one another on this beautiful Friday here in Mountain Hoping. And as we sit here situated on the island of Manhattan, remembering the Lenape who are here before us, the Canarsie, the Mogo, right, the Shinnecock, the Haudenosaunee, all of these pathways, roads that we see today, which are pathways that Indigenous peoples gathered for thousands and thousands of years. And a story I was told is that when Indigenous peoples came to this island of Manhattan, they left their weapons outside of the island and came in to talk about the conflict, to find solutions to the problems that they were experiencing in their daily life. And we're doing it right now. So beautiful, we're doing that right now together. So as we lay down our weapons, it sometimes can be ego or defensiveness, we welcome an open heart to talk about the challenges and find the solutions that we can work together on to move forward. And so I'm so thankful to Danny, my sister right here, who has been really holding this work in such an amazing way, organizing, advocating, programming, you name it, this lady does it. This lady does it. And in my language, we would say Makalena and Yako, thank you. You know, doing this work with you, it's just been so meaningful, so purposeful, and you know, it can be very difficult when we're looking for funding to be able to continue this work. And you know, Danny was with us before we had any funding, and she was the first person on the task force, and we were able to find the support resources to provide. Oh my goodness, what a difference it has made, and just the impact we've been able to have in such a short time. And so again, this is a prayer that we're putting down together in the community, and I look forward to see how this room grows, how this advocacy grows, and we matter, and we're here.
So yeah, I began here with UIC when I saw an application for the task force for MMIWG. So my name is Danny Kramer, and I am Hashimam and Yaqui, as well as Sonoran Mexicana. So my story is I grew up in New Jersey, and I have taken a lot of time to specialize in social work and working with Native American peoples to address some of the serious issues that plague our communities. And as I said, I saw this fantastic application and I applied. I couldn't stop myself. It really was a moment of clarity to begin to see and understand how colonial violence and genocidal conditions had affected my own family over generations and generations. And you know, looking at how families are removed and in urban environments. And so sometimes we don't have our relatives or our tribes right close to us. So what an amazing opportunity to work with the Urban Indigenous Collective, to be able to bring community to people, right? Because essentially that's what we're here doing. We're bringing community, we're bringing accountability, we're bringing about the work to face the difficult situations and circumstances that affect our people. And so my sincere and most grateful, humble thanks to all of you for being here and sharing in community, and to bring awareness to this topic that, again, is so important. It happens in so many ways to impact Native peoples in so many ways that it's hard to quantify if you don't know what you're looking at. And so it can become a stereotype, or it can become a negative idea or concept that you are judging people over. But these conditions of substance abuse, of suicide, of mental health issues, these issues that impact our community because of circumstances that have been happening from violence perpetuated through systems since the founding of this country. So because the Department of the Interior had a plan of action, and at that time, the plan of action was to decimate and erase the Native American people. And so because of colonization's growth and development, it has come to encompass or house and perpetuate this violence against Native people. And so we're going to have to interrupt that process. And we're going to have to stand together to safeguard our communities, to help our Indigenous youth and adolescents and young adults to be strong enough in their culture, in their sense of self, in their resources, in order to combat these conditions that are impacting on a regular basis. So we usually don't think of how it shows up in an everyday. And I used to do this sample when I was teaching for Stockton. I had a friend of mine who would volunteer with me, and he was an Indigenous male, and he very long, straight black hair, very typically Native looking or Indigenous looking by stereotype. But at the same time, this individual was an urban Indian who was no longer connected to his people. So he's very removed without support in a new area. And he was volunteering to help me bring awareness to certain issues that face Native Americans. And he sat still, and I gave him a stack of post-it notes, just regular post-it notes. And I said, every time I read a statistic that impacts you, if you wouldn't mind sticking one of those to yourself. And, as a good sport, he was like, okay. But then when I started reading the statistics from birth to death for the Native male, he became overwhelmed because he was covering himself in post-it notes. And what is that exactly? That is your social experience, right? So all of these things that are impacting him, whether it was incarceration and death, suicide, death of family, or substance abuse, being impacted familially, he had lost a brother to violence, and so the more statistics that I read, the more stickers he stuck, more post-it notes he stuck on himself. And I said, here we are expecting that this man can stand up and walk through life with these post-its all over him, stuck to him in all of these different ways, to all of these serious conditions. And it really worked to just kind of showcase that not everybody's situation or circumstances are the same. And so we really have to look at privilege and what it does, as well as how it impacts those who are not privileged. So I want to, again, thank you for being here. We had Austin, I just want to check and see if Anita is online. We're just going to check and see if one of our speakers, she did email and say she wasn't feeling well. So I'm not seeing her. Okay, well, I'm going to just cover the original.
I'm going to shoot Anita a text, but I also just wanted to share a story. So just one moment. Yeah. I always believe everything happens for a reason. We may have an idea of how the path is supposed to go, but Creator knows better, right? So I think this is a moment for me to just share with you all how this has impacted my life and why this has become a part of my advocacy. So for me, I grew up in Wisconsin. My family lives on the Menominee and Oneida reservations there. And I grew up very connected to my culture, dancing in powwows and jingle-dress dancer. And they say that dance is to bring healing to those who are sick in your community. And so I think from a very little girl, I knew that my purpose was to bring that healing to my community. But through that, I faced many challenges, as many Indigenous and Afro-Indigenous women do, surviving a lot of child sexual abuse. And that was very difficult for me to understand and to move through. And when I turned 17, I made a decision that I was going to move to New York City. And my family didn't understand that. I barely understood that. My mom said, "You've never even been to New York. Why would you go there?" But there was a calling in a voice that I heard and wanted to listen to and honor. And so I moved here to better understand the historical and intergenerational trauma of my family, pursuing a degree in psychology with a minor in sociology. And I thought that would help me to make sense of everything. But in the midst of that, I became sex trafficked by someone who I thought was a partner, a boyfriend. And unfortunately, that experience brought me to my knees. And that was really my rock bottom that I had to figure out my way out of. And I'm really thankful to the therapy, to the plant medicines, to the community that helped save me. And Anita was one. Anita is the executive director of Sovereign Bodies Institute. And my mother heard Anita speak. And she said, and my mother knows everything that I've gone through, and she supports me in a really beautiful way. And she said, "You need to know this woman, Anita. She's been through some very similar things you have, and she is so inspiring in her advocacy." And at that time, I felt so much shame about what I experienced. I didn't even realize what I had gone through, And I started to be able to put a name to it as I was able to listen to her and understand the grooming and understanding the levels of abuse and the complexities within them. And so I reached out to Anita. And she invited me to join the Sovereign Bodies Institute Survivors Leadership Council, which brought together Indigenous women from all over Carolina to have experienced sex trafficking, survival sex work, whose families have been taken, whose relatives have been missing and murdered. And then I recognized within this work and coming together with these women, my family has been impacted by this in so many different ways, looking back generation to generation. So, my grandfather, Chief Oshkosh II, was actually part of the first cohort that was sent to Carlisle Indian boarding school, where the mantra was "kill the Indians, save the land." And I actually have letters from my grandfather writing the superintendent, writing the Department of Interior, begging for his children back. Finding out that my grandmother was actually taken in what's called the outing system. So the outing system is basically domestic slave labor for young Native women. And she was taken into a home and he fought so hard to bring her back to that school, which more harm was done, ultimately wanting her to come back, to our home, and in that letter he wrote, we have an education system. We have programs to stay connected to the land and the water, to our tradition. Let them come home. And so I think about, the abuse that began with settler colonization and what was perpetuated through this boarding school era, and the generations of matriarchs that I come from that are survivors as well. And so I really found power through therapy and again plant medicines to begin healing a lot of those wounds and to find strength and beauty within my testimony. I always say your truth is good medicine. No matter what you've experienced, your truth is good medicine. And so I have this fear that my abuser would tell the world what he did to me. And told my trauma-informed life coach, and it was so beautiful. She was actually at South by Southwest at one of my speaking engagements and in the audience. And it was just a full circle moment. And I'll tell you why. Because I was so afraid that he would tell the world, he had been traumatizing me for years and stalking me for years. And she said, well, then you tell the world first. You tell the world first. And so that's what I did. When I graduated from NYU, I put together a video, and in the video, it talked about the statistics that Indigenous women face. And I said, I do it for the women who survived child abuse, and I do it for the women who have survived intimate partner violence, and I do it for the women who have survived sex trafficking. And I said, I do it for all those women because I am that woman. Right. And that was the beginning of sharing my truth, and the medicine that's come from it has been beautiful. Not to say that this work isn't challenging, not to say that this work isn't exhausting at moments, but what we find here are sisters that have been through similar things. And what we find are allies who are willing to stand not behind us, but alongside us. And so I just want to say thank you to my sisters who are here. Thank you to my allies who are also my newfound sisters. And I appreciate you all so much and coming together and being a part of that. And so I just also want to take a moment to honor my relative Ingrid Washiwatok, Flying Eagle woman, who was taken from us in 1999. She was kidnapped and murdered by the FARC guerrillas while in Colombia doing work with the Ua tribe. And she was an amazing Indigenous rights activist of the 21st century from the Menominee Reservation, and set up her life in Brooklyn, New York. And she did so much work to bring Indigenous peoples globally together. And, understanding her story and understanding her dedication to this work, I feel in a way that from Spirit World, she has passed me this baton. And so it's with honor, deep gratitude, and a deep responsibility that I come to this work in a vulnerable space to be able to share parts of me, to be able to uplift other voices who are doing this work, and to partner with incredible institutions and organizations who want to be in solidarity to continue this. So I'll give the mic back to Danny here and check in on Anita, and let's keep this going.
So when I joined the task force, I was so excited because I found myself absolutely awed by women like this that I'm surrounded with right now, who empower the process so greatly. I don't think without you it wouldn't be possible. Just FYI, that's how important I think you all are. My own experience is definitely what motivates me to be here. We know, the idea of sharing that experience, the shared experience that is Native American, there are so many great and wonderful and beautiful things of culture, of spirit, of medicine. But in addition to, there is that shared tragedy, that shared grief, the shared atrocities, such as was mentioned by Sutton, the boarding schools, the residential schools, and how they have impacted generations of Native people. And so, when we're looking at this crisis, we're looking at this genocidal violence. We're looking at that as creating dynamics that you're living through. And so, as a Native American, that shared experience, we can find strength in it, or we can let it take us down, and we can't let it take us down. And look how resilient we are. We have been here, we are still here, we're going to continue to be here. So as we move forward, I just wanted to share a little bit about my own experience. And, my coming into this work had everything to do with my experience as a Native woman, being raised a Native woman by a Native woman, who was raised by a Native woman, who was raised by a Native woman. And so my lean towards my ancestors in spirit and in honor and in tradition to honor them, I move forward with this work. This work lives in my heart, and it is so important to me to try to empower others so that they don't have to be alone through the grief process, through the process of building, through the process of connecting after having experienced traumatic or crisis events. So I had the experience of being doubted for my indigeneity by the court system back during my divorce. And this ended with my children being taken away. So I endured a forced removal, and very surprisingly, miraculously, it didn't kill me. Miraculously, it did not kill me. Just to give that the space. My ancestors bring me strength. In addition to that, I was unable to further advocate for my indigeneity because the court had sequestered these documents, which means you're not allowed to look at them, talk about them, or anything else. So that being said, there was no help for me. And in the process of enduring that, I went through some other really difficult times, becoming homeless and having to reposition my entire life from leaving a domestic violence situation. And so, not qualifying for supports in the community, or not being linked towards resources that were actually helpful. I had accidentally married an officer. I'm not trying to make a joke, but it seems that blue lives are more important than red lives at times. That was just my experience, right? So that being said, it was the hardest thing that I have ever had to live through. And my goal is to prevent child separations and removals, further decimations to Indigenous families, to keep families together, and to strengthen their supports through mental health resources, as well as create resources for other problems that we face, such as poverty or medical health, mental health, physical health, and connections to those things here on the East Coast through culturally competent support services. Really happy to say that Miss Anita MMIWG2ST is on the line, and I would love to be able to switch to her because, again, and I know that Sutton has a different relationship, but I came across sovereign bodies back when I first started doing missing and murdered Indigenous peoples work. And I use their website and their resources to share with community members on a regular basis. So I want to first thank Anita. Thank you, Anita, for everything that you've done. If you only knew how great your extent has reached into the community through those who you have empowered to help. Thank you.
And I just shared the story, Anita, but I just wanted to really acknowledge you and your support as a sister, welcoming me into Sovereign Bodies Institute, Survivors Leadership Council, helping me to find power and strength in my own survivors' testimony, and the work that you do impacts so many of us here in Indian country. I also just want to say Anita is not feeling well. And so we are very thankful for her to come in on the Zoom. She's going to have camera off, but she will be saying a few words. And also, I don't know if you want me to hold the mic to my laptop or.
We'll do a little tech transition here. So Delilah, if you could do me a favor and just hit mute where you are, and I'm gonna turn on the audio over here. And Anita, feel free to come off mute and join us. We'd love to hear you.
Hi everyone. My name is Anita. I apologize. I have my camera off.
Anita, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me? Oh no, can you hear me? Yes. Okay, I see a thumbs up. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. Hi everybody, Pivot Ishev. My name's Anita.
All right. Anita's in here. She's
Oh no.
yeah. She's speaking, but we're not hearing it. Okay.
I can hear you, Anita.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if everyone else can hear you.
We can hear you. There we go.
Okay,
Perfect.
you can hear me now?
Yeah.
All right, third time is the charm. Pivot Ishev. Hi everybody, my name is Anita. I apologize that my camera is off today. Thank you for being patient and understanding about that. I am joining today's dialogue from my homelands in Southeast Montana, and you can't see her, but my dog Sicha is also very intent on being part of this Zoom discussion today. So she's here with me too. If you can visualize like a dachshund pit mix, like just real, like, I don't know, 10 different res dogs, like generations later, she's the final result. Anyways, as was shared, I'm the founder of Sovereign Bodies Institute, and my current position there is Director of Research and Outreach. And SBI is about 4 years old, and I came to this movement as a survivor of trafficking, and also as somebody who has missing and murdered loved ones. And now, like the longer and deeper that I am in this movement, have, you know, even more adopted family that have connections to this issue as well. So it's personal to me in a lot of ways. And it's a big honor to be invited to share today, and just to get to see you know, how UIC has grown and taken leadership in this movement, and you know, to get to witness it and be a part of it today. Initially, the plan, I think, was for me to discuss barriers to accessing data, and I can certainly discuss that. But I also want to talk more broadly about what I see as some of the challenges in addressing MMIP on the East Coast. So I came to this movement as kind of a grassroots community member that was focused on building a database for MMIP cases throughout the US and Canada. And I can say that that database is, gosh, about 7 years old now. It predated SBI, and SBI became the formal home for it. And during those 7 years, I would say that accessing data on MMIP on the East, yep, there's Sicha. I don't know if you guys heard that. But accessing data on MMIP in the East Coast has been challenging since day one. And in 2018, the Urban Indian Health Institute published a report that I wrote on MMIP in urban areas throughout the country. And notably, it was really challenging for us to access information from law enforcement on MMIP in any city on the East Coast. One of our experiences in putting that report together is that we felt that that region was really kind of underrepresented because of the lack of data, and also a lot of lack of kind of grassroots and community supports for families that are experiencing this crisis. We're lucky that here in Montana, families have, really like 10 years, and more so in the last 5 years, but in the last 10 years, started coming together and holding space for one another and building programming. And now with UIC, we're seeing that start on the East Coast, but at that time in 2018, that organizing wasn't there kind of in a big way yet, at least in my experience and to my knowledge. So that was kind of the first major barrier that we reported out for the region. And since then, it's definitely continued to be an issue. I'm now a commissioner on the Not Invisible Act Commission, which is the federal commission on MMIP. There are 2 seats for Indigenous survivors of trafficking, and I sit in one of them. And in my role in that commission, I am the non-federal co-chair for the subcommittee on data. And one of the things that has repeatedly come up in the subcommittee on data is, lack of data from every jurisdiction possible, whether that's federal, state, tribal, or local. Also that data is really complicated, and it's complicated by region. That can include, issues around like barriers to reporting, officers not, forwarding the information on to where it needs to go, entering data into the federal missing persons database or the national missing children's database is entirely discretionary in most states. So it's up to that individual officer and they usually don't do it. So there's a lot of kind of barriers like that, but then there's also like fundamentally bigger questions around who we're accepting as women or girls, if we're talking about missing and murdered women and girls in specific, who we're counting as Indigenous and how we're screening for that. And then also who we're counting as a murder victim. Those I think are the bigger semantic arguments that I see law enforcement get into quite a bit. And on the East Coast, I think in particular, the issue around indigeneity is unique and complicated because of the history of colonization on the East Coast, and even like comparing New England to, Florida, it's very different history, right? So the East Coast by itself is certainly not homogenous, but there are really unique experiences of colonization that have shifted how Indigenous peoples from those areas are read and what indigeneity looks like there. And, frankly, I think there's a lot of anti-Blackness when it comes to deciding who's Indigenous and who's not. And in the context of the East Coast, we know that there's, large thriving tribal communities throughout the East Coast that also, have a lot of Black Indigenous families. And unfortunately, my experience is that when people from those communities who are Black and Indigenous go missing or are killed, their indigeneity oftentimes gets erased because there's an assumption that they're not Indigenous because they don't present in the like Pocahontas stereotype that non-Native people really look for. So that's been a challenge in terms of data. And also there's so many tribes throughout the East Coast that are not federally recognized, that there's a question, like, again, it becomes discretionary for individual officers or agencies if they decide to create protocols of who they're even, how they're going to document indigeneity, if they're going to honor state recognized tribes versus federally recognized. And then like cities like New York have really large, urban Indian populations, and have had those for decades. And yet Native people are kind of made invisible in those spaces too. So I think like my experience with police officers and places like that is it just doesn't occur to them to even ask if somebody's Native. And sometimes it's not even an option on the form because we're made invisible in that way. So all those different things kind of come together to create a really challenging landscape in terms of trying to determine how many of our people are actually missing and murdered in these places, and also making sure that they get the right culturally sensitive support and resources. One thing that I pushed for as a commissioner on the Not Invisible Act Commission was to have a field hearing in North Carolina so that Lumbee communities had an opportunity to participate, and of course the Eastern Band Cherokee as well. And unfortunately that wasn't approved. And part of it is it's a federal commission, and I think they're focused on federally recognized tribes, and also we're limited in terms of the number of field hearings that we were permitted to do. But I think it's what I've noticed in working with the data is that there is a large number of Lumbee women in particular, but I imagine that this affects people of other genders as well. But a large number of murdered Lumbee women that are not being documented as Indigenous and those families aren't, eligible for the services that the federal government is starting to provide because their indigeneity is not being recognized. So those are some of the issues that I see. And then, I just wanted to close with an example from a case in New York. One of the other issues that I think is unique to New York in specific, the only other place I've seen it is in Arizona, is you have a tribe that has land on both sides of an international border. And in the case of Akwesasne, you have New York, Ontario, and Quebec. And so you're dealing with 3 state and provincial governments, 2 national governments, or really three national governments, because you have the tribal government as well. And it becomes an extremely challenging landscape for families to try to navigate the justice system, and try to get any kind of interagency collaboration, or even to create like circles of safety. For example, we're working with a family member of a woman who was murdered in Akwesasne, and the perpetrator was released, convicted, did his time, was released, and has been returning back to the community. And that family no longer feels safe and has been actively publicly petitioning to have that person banished from the reservation. And it's become kind of like a jurisdictional quagmire where really the family's not getting support from anyone anywhere, and dealing with multiple layers of government that are all kind of passing the buck and not working together to create a safe environment. So yeah, that's kind of what I wanted to share today, just talking about our data and challenges to it, challenges for families in the region, and also to say that if there's families and survivors listening and tuning in today, SBI is a service provider for families, MMIP families, and Indigenous survivors of violence. We do provide services on both sides of the border, so US and Canada, to all Indigenous people, whether they're enrolled tribal members or not, whether they come from federally recognized tribes or not. We honor indigeneity in all of its forms and our relatives, no matter where they come from. So if there's anybody listening who wants some support, please feel free to reach out to us. Our call line for families and survivors is available by phone and text at 707-335-6263. And we're here to help and support. And yeah, I'll close with that. Ish, thank you so much for the opportunity to share today.
And Delilah, if we could just do a quick tech transition, if you could just unmute on your end.
Thank you so much, Anita. The wonderful resource of Sovereign Bodies Institute. Again, thank you so much for sharing that. It also has a wonderful website with all of their services listed, so you can go check them out. They have a great resource library, and there's all kinds of information on missing and murdered Indigenous peoples crisis, as well as the fantastic resources that they offer for Indigenous peoples. Thank you again, Anita. Thanks. So we're going to move next to discuss the missing and murdered Indigenous peoples task force, as well as the program in or the Urban Indigenous Collective. Often we'll do the slideshow. Yeah, that's correct.
All right, we need 1 second here. This is our online presence.
So this is the missing and murdered Indigenous women, girls, two spirits, and trans living in New York City and in the surrounding areas of Connecticut, New Jersey, and PA. So our task force extends into these areas to advocate for the missing and murdered in those states. You can keep going. And hit the next one. There we go. So the UIC's Missing and Murdered Indigenous Girls, Trans, and Two Spirits program was initiated in dedication, as Sutton was saying, to Ingrid Washanawak El Isa, or Flying Eagle Woman, who is Sutton's relative, and we just want to acknowledge that and uphold our missing and murdered, because they are never forgotten. And the idea is to honor and bring recognition to that. Thank you. Next slide. So the program is based on 3 pillars, and the 3 pillars are for research, advocacy, and education about the crisis itself. So we have community, right? Community, research, and advocacy. We bring visibility to our MMIP through research database, through cases, that we perform what's called FOIA requests, which is an Information Act request on those cases. As you heard Ms. Anita discussing, there was this major report done, or data request done, to 77 different organizations and agencies, Native organizations, or law enforcement, as well as other agencies and departments, for information about the missing and the murder. In making these requests, we're trying to learn more about the crisis so that we can then identify and define the crisis, so that we can then address, obviously, what needs to be addressed. So the program was built in partnership with Sovereign Bodies Institute, and to fill a gap for the visibility, the education and tracking, and providing resources to people who, people and families that have been impacted by the MMIP crisis and will not be okay. SBI addresses the missing and murdered crisis from the West Coast and in Canada, and gives invaluable guidance to our team. So we meet on a monthly basis, and they're able to help us when we are faced with certain difficulties, bottlenecks, or other issues as they present. They're a wonderful big sister. Thank you, SBI. Next. So the three pillars, the research is all about the data, and the data pertains to survivors, perpetrators, instances of violence, police and court responses to the requests that we make for this data information. The advocacy pillar of our program is really encompassed by our policy tracker, which is a fantastic map that you can find on our website, which provides an overview of the current state of legislation and policy introduced or implemented to address the missing or murdered Indigenous peoples crisis across the nation, as well as a rating of each policy. And this information is publicly on the website, and it's an easily navigated interface. You can see what legislation is currently in place or lack thereof. We're able to see, in the map, and just like with the data requests are being made. But there's difficulties when we try to get this information, as Anita so aptly described. We are losing, or the information is being erased. It's what we call a data genocide, or whitewashing of the data, which simply erases indigeneity out of the picture. And so, not to mention the very complex component of recognition and status, meaning or translated into who qualifies for what support services afterwards, because your recognition status may stand to impede you and or assist you in obtaining certain resources that are available through the government and through IHS and other Indian Health Services and other organizations and agencies that provide interventions for individuals and families that have experienced the missing and murdered crisis and other medical health related conditions that may be prevalent. So the community component or pillar of this project is to connect with the relatives and the survivors. The idea is to encompass the survivor's voice in all the work. And I think this is the most meaningful part of what we do as survivors, is to empower those in our community with what we have learned. It may not have been easy going through it or being affected by some of the things that we have been impacted by in terms of generational or intergenerational, as well as acute traumas that we have experienced being Native women or even Native men in the community. But this is because there's an epidemic of violence, given that these conditions that impact the MMIP from in totality, which would be the root causes for the MMIP, the genocidal violence, as well as the colonial violence. So, so important to encompass this voice and the memory of our missing and murdered, and to fight to correct the problems of jurisdiction, of lack of data, of accountability and transparency, and to make accessible the interventions that are necessary to keep our community safe and healthy, because that's the bottom line, is we want our children to grow up safe and healthy. So if Native women are being targeted for child removals by the system, which was designed at a time when kill the Indian and save the man, then we can begin to understand why the infrastructure not only fails, it's erroneous to say that it's failing. It was designed this way. And so how do we interrupt that? We have to interrupt what's going on. And so building health and safety and cultivating protective factors for individuals and Native individuals and Native communities is essential to strengthening the resolve of Natives against the conditions which cause missing and murdered Indigenous peoples and the violence that Native Americans experience on a regular basis. A Native woman is 10 times the national average to experience violence at the hands of white men. Actually, that number was in the upper 80%, and recently has gone as high as 93%. So it's not to say that there's not domestic violence that happens between Natives, or there's not Native on Native violence, because lateral violence is also an issue. The impacts of generational and intergenerational trauma impacts the neurophysiology. So there are impacts that are progenerated throughout the generations as they come. So there are changes that happen to our bodies in the way that we respond to stress, in the ways that we respond to trauma and other stimulants, because of the vulnerability that we have from living through generations of violence. And so these three pillars make us able to effectively advocate, bring forth the research, and to build community with those who need it the most, and to help us outreach into the community to raise awareness for the missing and murdered Indigenous people on the East Coast and all over the nation, into Canada, and in South and Central America. It's happening everywhere. It's not unique to the US. It's not unique to the East Coast. It's not unique even to just Indigenous women, as African American women, they're finding out now, are just as impacted. And it's time for us to circle our communities and elevate ourselves and our protective factors so that we can help to prevent this violence from negatively impacting our future generations. The decimation to the Native family occurs in a lot of different ways. One is the physical removal, which we saw with the boarding schools and the residential school era, and with, of course, the Trail of Tears, when the Native Americans were removed from the East Coast and brought to the West Coast, and then to Canada from Lenape-Hoking. I just want to acknowledge the land that we're on and the violence that they endured, the removal that they endured, the survival that they've endured. And so the way that this process of removals has impacted generations to come through the separation of land and stability, of wealth and economic justice, social supports, every way imaginable has been impacted in terms of the long-term effects. There are multiple long-term effects of having had suffered through such things as the Trail of Tears and the forced removals and the family members that we all share as a community. The removals of our grandparents or our aunts and uncles to the residential schools, you know, it's different when your whole race, and I use that liberally, your whole ethnicity shares a common experience that is connected to genocide. It's intense. I don't think we've even started having the dialogue up until the last few years, 10 years maybe, that awareness began to come with the women of Juarez out of Mexico, and we learned there was a femicide. And how do we get to that? There's a femicide here. How does it get to that? How do we interrupt that? So we're here and we're here to look at over the course of the conference, we'll be looking at colonial violence, genocidal violence, as well as their contributions to being the root causes of MMIP. In addition to that, we will address the data and the status of the data with Cardozo students, and we have a fabulous team of individuals who we work with on our research component, who helps us to reach out to the law enforcement agencies and departments that may hold information about Indigenous peoples or may not. And then they help us to request that information, and we're going to let them to present that information to you. So thank you so much, Cardozo, for being here.
Good evening, everyone. We wanted to start off by saying thank you for sharing your space with us and allowing to present about a topic that we have worked closely at hand with Urban Indigenous Collective. At any point, feel free to ask questions as we present the information. We're happy to clarify anything to the best of our abilities. And to start off, so my name is Ariella Omar, and this is my partner, Samantha Lauren. We are second-year law students at Benjamin and Cardozo School of Law. We are also part of the Human Rights and Atrocity Clinic, and thanks to our professor, who is online, and our supervisor, who is here with us, Jocelyn Getkin-Kistenbaum and Egin Byrne. They have introduced us to the project as well as our friends at UOC. And we have been collaborating with them for about half a year now. Wow, time flies. We're thankful for the time we spent as partners and have learned so much, more than we could probably have ever imagined. And we're just thankful for the kind, keen, and knowledgeable team that we have grown together as. So I wanted to start this off with a question. Probably Sutton, don't answer it. The Freedom of Information Act. I wanted to know, anyone in the audience, maybe even online, has anyone heard of it? And if they have, what do they know? We have the chat. If not, I can answer it for Sutton.
No answers in the chat.
Okay.
Let's send them in.
That's okay. I'll make it easy for everyone. So the Freedom of Information Act, also known as FOIA, provides that any person has a right to obtain access to federal and state agency records. This applies to federal agencies and does not create a right of access to records held by Congress, the courts, or by state or local governments. But you can submit a FOIA request to any department. The main purpose of FOIA's inception has been informed citizenry and to form and provide a type of checks and balances against a corrupt government by holding the government and states accountable. And I think most importantly, it was created to offer a type of transparency for the general public. And with that said, you know, as a human, your human given right, and as a citizen as well, is that you should know what the government is collecting and how it is collected. And through this presentation, we hope to inspire you to feel that you have the tools necessary to submit a FOIA request if necessary. And throughout our research, the main topics that we have come to learn about, and definitions as well, thanks to Danny and Sutton, have been that of data genocide, creating better policies and support and protection and prevention towards the MMIP issue. The term public record refers to government records that have been made, maintained, or kept on file in the course of official business by any officer, commission, agency, or authority of the state. So on a state level, you could obtain or try to obtain, as we are trying to do, police records and other items such as school district records, prisoner parole records, and so forth. So really, anything that is public information, you do have a right to submit a request to and for. At the federal level, it's known as FOIA, which means you can directly petition to get the information through each department itself. I put down 2 examples, such as the Department of Labor or National Archives and Records Administration. So you would go to their website, they have a form where you could submit the request. Oh yes, we also have slides. Sorry, I got a little bit of myself. And as pertaining to each state has a FOIA type legislation. And for our research purposes with UIC, we will be discussing New York's FOIL legislation, which is the Freedom of Information Law, New Jersey's Open Public Records Act, which is known as OPRA, and lastly, Connecticut's Freedom of Information Act, known as Connecticut FOIA. So as you can see, all 3 different names, but really meaning the same thing and offering the same tools. With each state's legislation comes its own set of conditions, filings, and timelines. Agencies can be requested at any state level, which range from state police departments, county sheriff's offices, town clerks, and town police departments. And at the state level, you can file it in many ways. The most uniform way that we have found, thanks to the submissions of UIC, has been that of MMIWG2ST, which is a free nonprofit collaborative news website, which provides original government materials. All MMIWG2ST correspondence and submissions are accessible to the public. And with that said, we have made up a little list of pros and cons, which provide that for the pros, the data is in one place, requests and responses are public to all. And I think the most beneficial part is that the entire correspondence is free and available to the public to look at and read and engage in that conversation. But the biggest con and the biggest setback that we've found is that many agencies, towns, jurisdictions, counties don't use MMIWG2ST, don't know of MMIWG2ST. So we found that, you know, more than a handful of submissions have been considered read because there was just no response at all. And that doesn't offer you an ability to speak with someone who can direct you into the, you know, the right direction. We found with a couple of submissions, they were very helpful individuals who did set us on the right path to talking to the right people to obtain that information. So therefore, there's been a lot of requests left unseen and unanswered. And as of right now, MMIWG2ST seems to be the only national database that we've found. But like I said, each state does offer its own portals as well as the federal requests. And I just have some examples for you. So for New York and New York City, we have something called a state comptroller, where you can submit your request and follow-ups through that individual. And we have passed out pamphlets that we have worked really hard on. And on the back of it, you will see a QR code where we have linked a bunch of really helpful websites for all 3 states. So the New York comptroller is on there. And for New Jersey, you have a website where you can submit directly, and that is to the Department of Environmental Protection Records Access Program. And lastly, for Connecticut, requests can be submitted to the city in writing with a specific document that you must complete called the Public Records Request Form. So again, we are in the tri-state area. We have 3 different states, 3 very different modes of assets that you can, you know, use. And with that said, if any agency denies a requested document, you do have the ability to appeal that decision within each state law's deadlines. And we will discuss, my partner will discuss the provided general guide using, we use to consider and engaging in all 3. And now I think the most important part of this is FOIA in an Indigenous context. We personally, I think me and Sam have never heard of FOIA privy to working with our partners at UIC, and they have used it as a tool, like many other Indigenous communities, as I'm sure, for data collection. The initial steps were to engage in the state's jurisdictions of submitting requests for murdered and missing individuals. While different departments store different data, it was clear after 6+ months of studying the submissions made that and contacting both the right and wrong agencies that many jurisdictions are not properly reporting these reports. Often agencies don't have this information, let alone store this information, and that is data in itself that we have found. So for us, it was definitely very frustrating, as I'm sure UIC has felt as well. And with all of that said, the goal of this is that it's gearing towards planning and presenting legislation down the road that will ideally lead to mandatory training and reporting accurate information with a slew of other things that we have discussed in this summit today. And it all pertains to the Indigenous community. You know, as we've said, many people are being misidentified, not being reported at all, not being recorded at all. And, you know, we know, as many of others do, the Indigenous community has been privy and experienced in one form or another the effects of data genocide in the United States, as well as the rest of the world, which has been responsible for. And we just want to echo our frustrations with you in the roadblocks that we have faced in Lenape-Hoking, as it is the highest concentration of urban space of Indigenous individuals located here. We know the data exists, and it's a shame because, you know, I'm sure New York City is the biggest hub and would be so helpful to this cause. But with that said, as you can imagine, us being, you know, second-year law students, for whatever that's worth, and having, you know, very smart and educated advisors and a team, we just want to share that, you know, with the audience as well as with UIC, submitting a FOIA request is not easy. And, you know, it should be, because it is offered to the general public, but is not. So it can prove to be extremely confusing. And yeah, with that said, I'm going to switch it over to my partner.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to echo what Ariella said and thank UIC for having us in their space. It's very meaningful for us, and we really appreciate all the work we've done together. I just wanted to kind of break down how to create a FOIA request, because Ariella said it's supposed to be easy. Citizens are supposed to be able to access information, and it's proven to be very hard. So we just wanted to break down the process a little bit to make it easier. So the first step would be to research your topic. So if you're researching MMIP, it's important to know about the MMIP crisis and use that information to frame what you're asking for. The second step would be to research the agency you're asking from and how the agency gathers data. So you would first have to see if the agency stores the data, if they collect it at all. And this includes looking into data if data is collected, and if so, how it's collected. There's something called open source data, which means a number of agencies are required to publish certain data. And it's important for the requester to find out what is publicly available before requesting, because this could save a lot of time and resources. And you could potentially avoid this whole process together if the data is just online in the first place. So the next step would be formulating a question. So based on your research, formulate a tailored question to your agency. This question should be specific and as clear as possible. And some factors to think about when formulating a request would be descriptions of records sought. Requesters must describe the records sought in sufficient detail to enable the agency to locate them within a reasonable amount of effort. And this reasonable amount of effort can differ between agencies. We've gotten some responses being like, we have files in boxes still, and we don't have the manpower to go through them. So yeah, the responses we've gotten have been very varied. And you can also specify the requested form or format, the records sought, and detail other things in your request. The next step would be to understand legal deadlines for replies and appeals. This is an easy step to miss, but has a huge impact on the FOIA process. So in our pamphlet, we included these legal deadlines, and we have some slides later showing, just with charts showing the deadlines. But something important to note that each state, as Ariel mentioned, has different FOIA type legislation. So each state has different legal deadlines for replying to FOIA requests and appealing the decisions if necessary. For example, in New York, once you send a request to an agency, the agency has 5 days to acknowledge your request, then 20 days to either give you your record or deny the record for any reason. And if this record is denied, the requester only has 30 days to appeal, meaning you want to say, hey, this decision is wrong, I'm going to appeal for XYZ reason. So as you can see, these deadlines aren't that long, so it's very easy to miss one. So we suggest creating a record, maybe like a spreadsheet of all your data correspondence, just to make sure you have all your dates in line and are keeping track of all data and the dates, because it could be very easily missed. The next step would be to reach out to the agency. So once you've done all that research, the requester can reach out to the agency with the question or questions you may have. And as Ariel mentioned, MMIP is a helpful platform used on the state level to send requests to agencies. And the last step would be to reply to all agencies and appeal decisions if necessary. So depending on the response from the agency, you can reply or appeal as necessary. If the agency grants you your information, gives you your records, that's great. If they gave you information but not everything you needed, you can follow up with them. And if the agency denied your request, you can appeal within the legal deadlines that are mentioned in our charts coming up. Yeah, so Austin, can we switch this one? Next slide, please. Okay, so if everyone on the QR code can pull up, just for online people too, can pull up, scan the QR code, which is on the back of that pamphlet. Oh.
Are we able to drop the 2 PDFs into the chat?
No.
That we sent with the pamphlet in the chat.
So what had happened is we changed
Yes.
the username to the clinic name, so they do have the correct one. That code doesn't have to.
Okay, well, this is,
We'll send it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Make sure it's.
Technical difficulties. This is a slide of what MMIP looks like, and this is a Connecticut FOIA request, and this got a very successful response. The records were granted, and some successful things we wanted to point out here is the information is listed exactly what is needed: the name, date of birth, jurisdiction, incidents, all that stuff is important to include. It says what format the information is requested, talks about waiving fees. So this person clearly looked into the agency and what information is needed. So this is what a MMIP request would look like and information you would want to include. And this isn't exhaustive. You can include other things, and as you can see, this request is quite repetitive, so you can leave stuff out. So they don't have to look exactly like this, but this was a successful one.
If you want to pull it up, real quick, I can pull it up.
Yeah, can you with the QR code, because that's actually the right, it should take you to the link straight with all our things.
So fingers and toes. That's the weird here, so it's.
No worries.
Sam's got a lot of coverage.
We appreciate you.
It's okay if you can.
Yeah, I can send it out.
Yeah, we'll send it, yeah.
I'll read it up next time.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, that one should take you. Great.
So if everyone scans this QR code,
Hope so.
I hope it works.
Okay, good.
Okay, and goes to, and scrolls down to the link that says template for New York FOIA request. Yeah, this is just the basic outline of a FOIL request for New York. So if you would want to send a FOIL request, you could fill in the blanks here and just use this template as guide. And all the links on the QR code are supposed to be helpful with creating requests, and we've included all the different states, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, in those links. We have the PowerPoint, sorry.
All that work.
Thank you, Austin.
There we go.
Okay, the next slide.
Okay.
So this is, these are the legal deadlines for the New York Freedom of Information Law. As you can see, it's quite complicated and there's many steps and short deadlines. So although this law is meant to just provide information, it can be very easy to miss a deadline. So we just thought making a graphic would be helpful in, you know, FOIL requests. Yeah, and you can go to the next slide, Austin. This is New Jersey's Open Public Records Act. Looks a little simpler, but as you can see, each state has different legal deadlines for filing requests. Next slide.
Okay, and then we have the last one, Connecticut. As you can see, it kind of got simpler, which is kind of annoying. Kind of wish they all had the same deadlines, but alas, they do not. We've provided everyone in the audience with a copy of the PowerPoint, so you do have those charts, and we have several extra copies that we would love to give to you guys so that you could have them readily available in your office space. Again, we just want to say thank you. We are so humbled to be here, and we have loved working with you guys. We're very sad it's coming to an end, but that doesn't mean the friendships and the connections and the experiences that you guys have offered us. And so with that, thank you. Oh, sorry. Does anyone have questions?
In the chat.
Zoom in.
Hopefully we were very clear.
No questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I don't-
A viewer.
Oh.
Very sweet. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
so much. Thank you, so. Well, I just want to say Magalwainen, Yako, a big thank you to everyone who is here in real life or virtually on Zoom. We appreciate your participation for our first summit. As I said, you know, the people who are here are honoring this path that we're walking and honoring this prayer that we're putting down together to bring light to this epidemic of violence that our Indigenous women, girls, trans, and two-spirit face every day. And together we will come together to be able to heal, to be able to bring advocacy, to ensure that our loved ones are being honored, and that those who are missing or murdered are never forgotten. And so I want to thank you all for being here. I want to thank Cordoza. I want to thank Urban Indigenous Collective, and I want to thank Danny. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all my online viewers. I want to thank you for your time, for your interest in the topic, for your participation, your support, all of that. I know I have many friends from the MMIW community who joined us on the virtual link, and I appreciate that, and I appreciate you and all the work that you do. Thanks so much. Thank you, Cordozas. Thank you, Sutton, UIC, Austin.
Yes.
And there's food, so please eat food, and you have the to-go containers, so take it with you.
Pretty.